So we talk a lot on here in this podcast about women embodying being limitless and what that means in business and in life. But today's guest takes it to a whole new level. Karina Waters went from being a tax accountant in Perth, Australia, to now restoring a 13th through 18th century French chateau, the Chateau de Gudanes, which is classified as a French Class 1 monument, given that one of its original architects was responsible for the building of Versailles. And I had the pleasure of visiting it last summer for their 7-day experience. Was truly a bucket list trip. Since being under the love and care, Karina and her family, under the love and care of her family, the Chateau has gone from ruin to global sensation with over 400,000 followers on Instagram and countless features in Harper's Bazaar and Architectural Digest. Hi, Karina. How are you?
Bonjour, Anna. Very well. How are you today?
Good. How's the French winter treating you?
Okay, I have to say it's a little bit cold outside today, but I'm sitting here all woolied up and we don't have heating in most of the rooms, so it is
Yeah.
quite. I also have like a hot water bottle as well to sit here, but it's good, but it's going to snow over the next week, so we're very excited. Being Western Australian, like being able to think about going skiing is like a gift, unbelievable. Very, very excited at that.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think one of the things that surprised me most is like, this is not the typical like 4 seasons, 5-star luxury type of chateau. This is very much a authentic rustic kind of experience, which in my view is honestly better. But I just want to paint the audience a picture in case they aren't familiar with the chateau or you. So just a little bit of background. You went from accounting in Australia to now restoring a 65 French chateau with little to no experience. You at the time didn't know French. And just for context, the chateau is in a tiny little town of like 30 people in the Pyrenees Mountains, an hour and a half outside of Toulouse, right on like the Spain border. So English is honestly not that common. So you had to teach yourself French, with no experience of navigating the French bureaucracy system because you did purchase a monument. And at the time of the sale, the chateau was in such a state of ruin that there was an entire ecosystem growing in the foyer. And yet, with all of that, you still looked at it and was like, yeah, I'll take it. I can do this. Which most people, I feel, most sane people would be like, I think I maybe know. Maybe this is something that maybe in the future with experience I'll do. But you kind of just saw it, and in your delusional state, which we love being delusional here, we're like, yeah, I can do this. So what was kind of like your thought process behind that?
Well, when we did go in search of a property, my husband and I at the time, we were really thinking about just a small farmhouse somewhere in a village. So
Yeah,
we,
that's not what happened.
baguette, and perhaps for say 3 months of the year, we might be able to sort of transition to the next part of life, particularly when our children had already, where they're at university and were establishing their own lives. So we thought, oh, we can perhaps travel to Europe. We had hardly done any traveling in Europe at all, and only been to France twice, just in Paris. So we thought maybe just a little farmhouse somewhere. And on our criteria from a French friend of mine who I've known for many years said, do not get a chateau, do not get a historical monument project. So just before we left Australia to go looking for this little farmhouse, we saw this chateau on the internet. So we thought, oh, imagine driving into the Pyrenees. And not that I actually knew where the Pyrenees were at that point, but anyway, we found ourselves driving down into the Pyrenees and just, around. We drove into this village. We could see the chateau on a hill, and we thought, wow, that must be it. So we eventually found it, and as you know, Anna, there's several gates. So eventually we got to the front gate, and it just captivated our attention right from that very moment. And the owner at the time, he showed us the gardens first, and so by the time we got to the front door, we were already, we were ready to sign on the dotted line then. And I think that it was so overwhelming with so much destruction that he then showed us 2 rooms on the right, and one was this gold gilded 18th century music room. And, and in this music room, Voltaire and Diderot and Rousseau had dined in this room. And then we thought, maybe we can do this. And the owner gave us the financials for the restoration. And we thought, yeah, maybe we can do this. And then they said, oh, look, you don't have to worry. Although it's a historical monument, you don't have to worry about the inside. It's just the outside. So 2 years later, when we purchased the chateau, when we were, at the notaire's office, which took an 8-hour transaction, in the fine print, it said, no, the entire inside has to have full authorization to do any work. So, you're at that point. Do you buy it or not buy it? And this has been going on for 2 years. So we just said, yes, we will. And so the roller coaster began from that moment, I feel.
Yeah. And I find that so interesting because obviously I don't think a lot of people have understanding of what goes into buying a monument. But it's so interesting that even though you own it, the French government still has authority over it. So, for example, and we'll go into this, but like if you want to do even the tiniest bit of repair to the bathroom or whatever it is, like you have to go through all of these levels of government to get anything done, which just adds to the headache of owning a monument.
Exactly. So we were unprepared for that because, like I said, in the 2 years leading up to the purchase, there was none of that was discussed. So we weren't ready for that. Anyway, so as soon as we purchased it, we knew that we would have to engage the architect from Paris, for the chief architect from the historic monuments, and we'd also have to engage an architect locally. So that process in itself required a lot of visits and plans, engineering drawings, because at the time when we bought it, the roof was half on, half off. Nearly every level of floors and ceilings were destroyed. So there was a huge amount of work, and it took 6 months just to demolish out the trees and the mold and the green, stinging nettles growing everywhere. So yeah, we weren't prepared for any of that. So I think maybe if we had been prepared for that, we probably would have maybe taken that small little farmhouse somewhere. But I guess that's the thing, is that sometimes in that naivety and not really knowing everything, that you can become sort of more of a risk taker than perhaps being so risk adverse.
Oh, 100%. And I think just in general, regardless of, if you're buying a chateau or if you're starting a business, I think everybody goes into it naively. I mean, yes, you understand that it's going to be hard work, but nobody understands what it actually is like until you're in it. And then you're kind of like, oh shit, I'm like in like neck deep. Like now it's too late to get out. But one of the things that I find so amazing about you is not only are you like such a visionary, but you truly have like the mindset of like everything is figure outable. Like no matter what, like I will find a solution, even if it's I remember you told me the story of like the plumber was literally taking months to get back to you. So you're like, you know what? I'm going to YouTube plumbing and I'm going to do the plumbing myself. So it's just that like notion of like, yeah, it's not cute, but at the end of the day, like you are the leader, you are the visionary, and it is truly your responsibility to get this done. So you're going to take whatever it's going to take to get the job done.
Exactly. And I think I've divided my life into BC, which was before Chateau, and now AC. And I wasn't that person BC. So, I mean, I had, you emerge into adulthood, and then I was married with 2 children. And so this is like a reinvention of, perhaps on a certain level also, of like who I am. And I really ever had that in me, because I hadn't really ever been tested on that level. So yeah, there's a lot, I think, that, and also self-growth, learning along the way through every transition in life, particularly in adulthood, that that you have these skills that are there if you need them. But certainly one of the very key things to a project like this is really problem solving. And there are, and I sometimes go around with this saying that if you don't like something, you just lower your standards. And that's the think that's my next fallback if I can't solve it.
But in my mind, you're like, I can solve that. I can solve that. Sure, I can become a plumber. Sure, I can do like it's just amazing what you as a person and can do once you're tested. And I know for me, even starting my business, like I've been every single day is like a therapy session because every single day you're just confronted with things that have to get done because you were truly responsible for them. Even if it's like other people's job that you're hiring, it's still your responsibility. So it's a constant, relentless journey of every single day being tested. But at the same time, I'm definitely not the person I was 2 years ago when I started my journey into my business. And it's just so incredible to to see self-growth and self-development in myself, but then also in my clients and women like you who take on these like limitless projects in their life.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the gifts that you receive back in all of that risk taking, versus, like risk adversity, that, you have strengths and that the reinventing of yourself, the discovering of yourself and what you're actually capable of as a human being, as a woman. I mean, no, in many of my roles in my BC life, I probably in some ways had more gender inequality than what I even have now. So
Mm-hmm.
now, I mean, I have less of that, even in this remote place in this far corner of the world where I don't really speak the language very well. So I'm used to, even getting used to sort of more equality is, and so you can solve problems because in so many ways too, because you actually are listened to. So it's multifactorial in that context as well.
Yeah. And so when you were in the process of like buying this and you were telling your, friends, colleagues, did people think you were crazy? Like what was the reaction when they found out what you were actually doing?
Well, first, my children at the time, I don't think they quite believed that we would go ahead with this. I mean, you met my daughter Jasmine, and I
Yes.
must say from the very beginning that this project and the journey of the last several years has really been Jasmine and myself doing this project and continuing on with the sustainability of it. So whenever I say me, I really should be saying Jasmine as well, because Jazz is really instrumental to
Yes.
the whole project. But yes, in the beginning, they thought that we were crazy. And then I did this video because it was so destroyed, all the,
Yes.
all the levels, and we couldn't get in. I thought, I'll just do this video and I'll put it on YouTube, and that way all our family and friends can see it. But I'll speed it up really fast so no one can really see what it looks like. So then it was so fast, and then I got the wrong music in the title, but then it suddenly went viral, this video, and then everyone's going, oh, it just drives you crazy watching that video. It's so fast. But the reasoning behind it was that we just didn't want anyone to think we were so crazy about it. But yeah, a lot of people really sort of didn't understand, particularly close relatives that
Mm.
they might not see us again or see much of us. And a lot of friends didn't understand what we were doing. And that took a little while to come to terms with. But now after you sort of, when you're in a project or whatever, you start to realize that can't really be responsible for that.
Absolutely. And I think that I've seen that in my life and I've seen that in my clients' life where that's why community is so important, finding the people that do understand you and understand your vision and what you're trying to do, because it gets to be very lonely. I mean, you have Jasmine and your family, and now you have a community of people, but the beginning is very lonely when you have this grand vision and your loved ones, as much as they love you, they can't really get behind it because they just like they're not in your shoes and you don't understand it, which is why community is so important.
And not understanding it is a key thing, because at this point, and for the first few years, I didn't even understand myself what I was doing here. How could I expect anyone else to
Yeah.
understand that?
Yeah.
And
So mhm.
so now, I mean, this is actually our 10th year since we first saw the chateau. So it's taken a while to actually understand our story, my story here, really, and that's a great thing in the beginning, because it's like for the first few years, 5 years, we had so much inquiry with television, books, etc. But how can you write or share a story if you don't even know what you're doing yourself? So it's a lot of in it as well.
Yeah. And so something that I found really interesting is that the chateau is technically a business, but at the root of its core, it's really a family home. So it's not an Airbnb, it's not a hotel, it will never be those things. So at
Mm.
what point were you like, let's turn this into some kind of income stream? At what point were you like, okay, we can sort of make this into a business? When did that point kind of hit?
So when we first started the work in 2014, obviously there was no floors and ceilings, no electricity, no plumbing. So over the next few years, we had big teams come in, put all of that in. And then in 2014, I started the Chateau on Facebook. And I woke up in the morning and suddenly there was just these thousands of followers. So I just thought, I said to my son, oh, you guys been messing around hacking into Facebook. And they went, no, no. And then I looked on the emails, and then there was an email from the Huffington Post. So then it just all went viral after that on Facebook. And then my 12-year-old neighbor said, why don't you start Instagram? I went, oh, okay. Well, I guess we could do that. So then that, Instagram and Facebook got behind it all, a lot of the media. And then it just got shared around the world very quickly. And then there were many people who were saying, can we come and help? So by this time, it was like 2016. And by 2017, we thought, well, maybe we could do something, but we don't still have electricity, but maybe we can just use candlelight. And maybe there is a way to solve a problem here. So in 2017, when we had our very first Chateau experience, the day before the oven arrived, the fridge arrived, and it was a complete success, and we've all enjoyed it. And we called it Chateau Glamping, and I guess it is a unique experience. But I think that's the charm of the chateau here, and yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. It is a completely different experience. And something that I really appreciate about it is that this was not going to be another like four-season stay. This was not going to be, it's not a hotel. At the core, it is a family home. And you would think with this like huge monument that's stone and looks very cold, that even the first time that I walked inside, and I actually discussed this with a couple of the other people that were staying there at the time, that it feels so warm, and not in like a physical warmth just because it was summer, but like it truly feels like a home. Like when you walk inside of it, there's just this kind of like homey feeling, which you would not expect in a 65 like room monument. But you can really like even get a sense of feeling of like the blood and sweat and tears that you and Jasmine have put into this place, and just the like integrity and intentionality. And like it's hard to even like put into words, or when you see these amazing photos, because unless you physically experience it, like you, it's hard to explain like the magic that you've created inside of this chateau, which brings me to like the experience of it all. And yes, the chateau is beautiful in itself, and you have all these like antiques and everything, and the food's amazing, but it goes more into like the intentionality behind like all of your decisions and like the little details. And even when our group came in, just like the homey feel of like welcoming us and truly feeling like we're a part of your family even for a week, like I don't think like you get that anywhere. So can you kind of walk us through like what was your vision for the experiences, and how do you kind of see incorporating the general public into the chateau?
Well, I think one of the most important things for us was that in any situation where someone enters your home, that person is not really a guest. They're your friend. They're part of, they're entering into your home. And when I grew up, our home had an open door policy, and my mum graciously welcomed anyone that ever walked in the door. And I remember once there was even a burglar, and she asked if they wanted a cup of tea. But at the core of that was really, I learned that from my mother, and I think that one of the most important things, and having traveled a lot ourselves as a family, feeling like you're welcomed into a home rather than being a guest, that someone even knows your name, or and you feel included, you're not excluded, and that you feel like you matter. uh, I think that they're just really important things. I remember once going into a fine hotel in London, and every time I walked in there, the security guard would ask who I was. And it's like after about the 10th time, it's like, wow, this is so impersonal, and so it just doesn't make you feel great about yourself at the end of the day, like you're invisible. And I think I would never want anyone to ever feel that ever entering into this place. And that's very important to us. And the details and everything, I mean, that's really about love, because love is in the detail. It's the small things. It's not necessarily the big things in life that matter. I remember once one of my friends said to me, always have postcards, because once she stayed in a hotel, and there were stamped postcards. And how thoughtful is that, when you don't have to go and fight with the post office, in a foreign country. So it is it's in the details, but the warmth is really important, I think, as to be human, and human to human contact is paramount. And I think it's the most important ingredient here. And I think it always has been that way. And that feeling, I feel, is the same feeling that we had. And it's probably why we purchased the chateau, based on a similar feeling, because John Ruskin, who's this philosopher from the 1800s, he said that when you build, let your hands build with love. And so if you've built a home with love, or a monument or anything with love, it's why some places you go into that you have this beautiful warmth and affinity with. And it's hard to not feel that this wasn't built with love, because on all accounts, the family that built it were well loved. And they also carved love hearts into the marble fireplaces. So one would think that the foundations were already set, and they just needed to be reestablished again, I feel.
Oh, 100%. And even regardless if it's a home or a business, like I often talk about, like really building out a client experience that makes people want to stay, regardless if it's, I'm working with somebody on their marketing strategy, or you're restoring a chateau. Like the way you build relationships and the way you treat people really matters, right? Not just from like a good business point of view, but just from like a humanity point of view. So it's like I'm constantly encouraging my clients to like build out those experiences to not only, make money, but also just to have a true impact for the good of humanity and building something that's truly meant to last.
Well, then it will become, work is really love, which will be visible. Um, and I think that's the difference, that no matter what we do, I mean, there's a beautiful quote that's like, if you bake bread, but you don't bake it with love, it will always be bitter. It will always be bitter. So
Yes.
it's, no matter whatever you do, if the core of what you're doing, and we're not talking about dreams and passions here.
Hmm.
I find in this sort of type of project that purpose and dreams and passion is not really what this is about. It's really, at the core of it, is just work, which is what it's been able to join up with something that you feel is really love, and that love is really visible. And then
Yes.
that is what is reaped, no matter in what regard, in whatever, however that reward is returned.
Yes.
And
And
it's
it, mhm.
natural.
Yeah. You definitely care a lot. And when we were there, you really did anything that made us feel like that much more welcomed. Even that night, I don't know if you remember, but that night, it was like 11 p.m. at night. And one of my roommates called you because there was a bat in her room. Because bats are prominent in the country, in the mountains in France. And clearly, we had no idea. All three of us were city girls. So we had no idea how to get a bat out of our room. And so we called you, you were already sleeping, but then you just came up with like a broom and you're like, okay, ladies, I'll take care of this. But like, I just can't imagine anybody else doing that. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, you truly are like, okay, well, you're in my home. And if you have a bat in your room, I'll take care of it. And like, that's just that.
Well, fortunately, in France, the bats don't have rabies, which is a very fortuitous thing. But yeah, that's the thing is that I mean, look, I like BC. I mean, I would have been that person too. So I totally get it, right?
And so from intentionality, something else that I really noticed was in integrity. And we kind of touched on this, but I remember I was having actually a conversation with Jasmine. We were in the car driving back to the chateau from somewhere, and we were talking about the recent Zimmerman shoot that you did on property. And we were talking about how, like, you actually get a lot of requests to, do weddings, to do really big campaign shoots on the property, all these different types of events, kind of like you mentioned earlier. But you have very strict guidelines, values, and just terms and conditions for who you work with. And from a branding point of view, that's actually really important because you never want to dilute the brand. But can you kind of walk us through what kind of values or just what kind of standards you have into partnerships or even like welcoming people in?
Well, yeah, particularly with commercial shoots, Jazz has really been instrumental in establishing and maintaining a philosophy. Jazz does all the work behind the scenes, particularly in relationship to commercial shoots like in Zimmerman, etc. But we do have a philosophy, first of not saturating the branding market here, um, and really we know what we have actually put into the chateau. And when you talk about it financially, physically, emotionally, you then, if you write all those things down and flowchart them, then you do know what something is really worth and all the things that you have to give up, whether it's not seeing your elderly relatives for 2 years or 3 years. So you know what you're actually worth if you write it down and really look at it with intent. And then also there's the philosophy of equality. Jazz is really firm, and we turn down, for example, high-end shoots of which there is not inclusivity with models, etc., etc. So we're very firm with what our values are here, and we won't accept anything that is not exactly that we have as part of the Chateau philosophy.
Yeah. And I think that goes with all businesses as just good marketing and branding around the idea that, like, if you want to build this experience and you want to build, a premium business, like, you really do have to hold true and say no a lot because you don't want to saturate it. You don't want to dilute it. And you also want to make people feel included and inclusive. So really holding true to those standards and those boundaries, I think, is key for building any long-term business.
Yeah. I mean, look, we understand fully that we have our workshop programs, commercial, and we know that it isn't accessible to everyone that follows the Chateau. And there, we've looked at ways around that. We can do day tours, we can do other things, but at this point in time for our business, and ultimately for the sustainability of this historical monument, it's the way that our business model has to be at this point
Mhm.
in time.
Yeah. I mean, from somebody who's experienced a chateau, let me tell you, I'll throw money at you. It's truly such a priceless experience that, I mean, there's a reason I'm going back again this following June because, like, I just can't get enough of it. One, as a self-proclaimed Francophile, but two, it's just such an incredible experience. And like I said, this is not your typical let's stay in vacation here. This is truly an experience day in, day out. And the group, so it's a group experience. So you're with other people. But it's just, you meet the most amazing people. The team that you've hired is the most amazing team. And it's just, like I said, from day one, I just felt like, oh, like this is my home too. And that's just such an incredible, unique experience that I have truly never had anywhere else.
That's just really important to us. And it's very important to me that someone would feel like that, because I do know what it feels like to be excluded and to not matter. I mean, I think that's a really awful feeling, like we touched on before, with it, as a human being, to feel invisible. And then regarding our team, what I love about our team is the generational spread of that, and it's all, you know, this ageism thing, particularly for women in my, you know, age group, and you get older, and, you know, on a team level, how we can learn from so much, because older people can learn so much from younger and vice versa. Sometimes there's always this thing, and with what I read recently with women or people who are older, that they sometimes undervalue the skills that a younger person has, and that goes by, and older people think that younger people don't value older people, right? So it goes the other way, but you actually need the skills of both sets, because in young people, you know, as we touched on again, you know, with risk taking, it's really important in business to have risk taking and risk adversity as well. So as you get older, it's a little bit like saying, well, when you get older, you're more scared that, or you think that roller coasters are more unsafe. Well, they're no more unsafe than what you were when you were 20 or 30 or 15. It's just that you have this, you know, you develop this wisdom that's not always quite validated. So a good mix is great. And we love our mix in the team. I think having different age groups where everyone's really valuing the professionalism of each other is important.
100%. And so when we talk about, we've already discussed challenges you've had, but what would you say have been like a few out of the last like decade that you've now owned this property? What have been like the biggest challenges that you've faced? Whether that's, I remember when we originally met, you were like, yeah, you know, I thought I would buy the chateau, send contractors in and call it a day. That turned out not to be the case. You don't just send in contractors. That's not how this works. But what have been like overall the biggest challenges where you're like, that truly like changed like the DNA in me after experiencing that?
I think, you know, we don't talk much on a personal level when we have done anything, particularly in the media. But I think what really, one of the things was preparing for this podcast, or really giving thought to some things, was that in the very beginning I measured that the success of our project would be how we together as a family, how united we, and I measured it in 10-year increments. I thought, well, this is going to take 10 years before we're even going to call this a home, and that has been true. So when you joined us last year, Anna, that was the first time it felt like a real home. And I don't mean with hospitality, I mean living in it as a home. And I used the measuring stick of how we would be, our closeness and unification as a family. And look, that's been the greatest challenge for the four of us to see eye to eye, the challenges of living apart. And we never expected, you know, as husband and wife, etc., to be apart, but that was the reality to keep the project going, and those sorts of sacrifices as a family. And then I suddenly thought, well, you know, having just that as being your measuring stick of your own personal success is probably, it was probably naive in itself, because this project and the future of what's going to happen here, particularly with succession and generations, like if with French rule, that, you know, with inheritance, that this would become the property of our children, well, then it was essential that this was a going concern, not only as a sustainable historical monument, but sustainable for them. So it's bigger than, I thought to myself, well, it is actually bigger than having just the benchmark of interpersonal family relationships. It has to be bigger than that. And I guess that's the same for many businesses. People are going to be hurt, or don't understand the process, or feel lonely. I remember one time my husband called me and he said, oh, he was in Perth. He goes, I'm so lonely. And, you know, I said, oh, hang on, I'm living in a cold chateau, living in a tent with no electricity. And then I thought, oh, and I'm going, oh, yeah, I can understand how you feel so lonely. Then I got off the phone and I thought, hang on a minute, like there's something wrong here. But
You're like, You're like, I'm the one chopping wood here. Like,
well, before this, that, you know, I would have my nails done and things like that.
mm,
Right? So then I read Scott Kelly's book, who was the first man on the International Space Station for
yes.
a year. And he had a similar experience that he wrote. So he's on this fireball at 20,000 kilometers a year in low orbit. And his partner rings on his once a week call and says, "Oh, I'm really lonely." And he's going, "Oh, yeah, I feel really bad that I've been so selfish about this." But, you know, like, I think, well, if he's been told by his partner that they're lonely, I've got nothing to complain about. But
No, it's
also, but you know
mm,
that you know that's if that's a decision that you make, and we made this decision to do this project, then they are the consequences, that you are going to be lonely or things are going to get tough, but you have to get through them, and you can't get through them if you don't keep going and keep trying.
100%. I mean, I've even experienced that. And no, I'm not physically lonely. I mean, I live in New York City and I have friends and things like that. But once again, going back to the point of like, nobody truly understands what I'm going through. And so nobody understands like the day to day, struggle or the hustle or the grit or the this didn't work out or I'm having trouble with this. Like, unless you're physically in it, it's really hard. And, that's why you do need to find people that understand, but also understanding that there are just consequences to your dreams and to your actions. But at the end of the day, like if you are really passionate and serious about this, you do need to keep going because there's only one way out of it, out of the situation, and that's through it. And that's just how it is.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, understanding that, that you're a human being and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. And sometimes you sort of think, sometimes I think, oh, I would like my old life back every now and again. And that's realistic. But then I know it would never go back the same again. And every time, I do sort of feel, and I mean, look, when you have a chateau, it doesn't come with a handbook on how to restore a chateau or how you're going to conduct your life or live your life in a chateau or restore it. Just recently, I think I've become one of the probably I've become an expert on how to put armoires together. So if anyone's bought an armoire in America and I need to do a YouTube video because it's not quite like putting together IKEA stuff. But you have to just keep on going, and also I think the other key thing is to keep on learning, even with all of those challenges. I felt that in this whole thing of my life and in this AC after Chateau, that one of the big key things I've had, and I've taken on roles that I've never thought that I would ever do. For example, tiling and glazing windows. I mean, you have to glaze windows because birds fly through them or something all the time, right? You can't call out the window guy and say, "Can you put a pane in my in my window?" Right? But it's the continual learning and learning whenever you can, and becoming the best version of yourself all of the time is just instrumental and just not follow your dreams, but to actually live with intention.
100%. And staying curious, I think, is just
Yeah,
it's a very impactful way to live. Not even if you're a business owner, but just like anyone to stay curious and to not settle for the safe route, but to actually live with intention and follow the path that maybe nobody understands but is true to you.
yeah. I think for me, I think that with all there's lots of things come out, and I think particularly people that would like to live in France and everything, and there's these dreams and passion. Those words are thrown around very loosely. For most people, it's not a. I mean, it's just not a reality. And this was never a dream of mine, to be honest. To live in France to restore a chateau. I mean, for whatever serendipitous reason that has happened. And I'm fully aware of that. And I'm also fully aware that, these things can come across as fairy tales, and 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 our philosophy here is that I never wish to burden anyone with the challenges and the chateau shenanigans and the problems, because at the end of the day, they're still chateau problems. They're not life and death. They're not health problems.
Yep.
Um, but what I do love about over this 10 years, the word intention, and I think that intentional living is really is so much more powerful. And just recently for 2023, I looked at, instead of looking just at the beginning of the resolutions, Chateau resolutions, I looked at the 31st of December of 2023 and tried to visualize what that could look like or would look like in my mind and work backwards. And I have to say, Anna, when I did one of your courses online, and when you were talking about it from a budgetary point of view, a financial point of view, of looking at coming backwards to where it was, say, for example, the financial year was December and you work back. I had never actually done that before, even as I was a chartered accountant for 25 years, but I'd never actually had done that with the Chateau. And then I thought, no, I really have to live, like, we're at 10 years now, and now is the time that, before the Chateau was like running the roller coaster, right? And I was just reacting. Now it's got to a point in the next 10 years where it's more a symbiosis between the two, where we're both running this roller coaster. And I have to step up with and I think it's my 10-year thing now, is intention. And I think that's really so powerful, so realistic.
100%. So Karina's talking about my sales planning workshop that I ran free. It's in link in bio if ever anybody wants to plan out their year, half year, whenever you're listening to this, step by step, how to work backwards into creating your sales planning forecast in a very easy way, even if you're afraid of numbers. But yes, one of my pillars for my company is intentionality. So regardless if that is in any single decision, from a budget point of view to me saying yes to something, me saying no to something, like, I truly want to not only live but run a business that is very intentionally driven by impact, but also by lifestyle. So I feel like that's probably why we get along so well, because we just share similar values. So what is your long-term vision for the Chateau?
So that was the interesting thing, is that we've just hit this 10-year mark, and now it feels like this is a home. It's not a ruin anymore. We have heating in some rooms. I mean, that's just a game changer when you have when you have a heater. But I think I think that our ultimate goal is to still make this historical monument, because it's a class 1, which is the highest level that you can have, is to still make this a sustainable project, environmentally and historically, for the future. And that future could be for my children, it could be for someone else's children, families, and institution, whatever. So to continue on with the restoration is paramount to us, because that will be ongoing for decades, I feel. And then it's really, now looking at how personally do I transition now, reinvent into an even more rewarding life that is economically sustainable, intellectually and creatively sustainable, I feel. So I'm excited for the next 10 years.
I'm excited for the next 10 years. I'm going to be back every single year. So just so you know. So you have the experiences going on next summer. I'll be attending the June one. Is it already all sold out, or do you have any spots left?
We have a few spots on a weekender, I feel. We are also going to add 2 more in the fall as well. So we're also working on our second book, because we had our first book, which we'd sold out. We self-published in the end, only because we knew that that was more financially sustainable for the Chateau than going with the publishers, which we were offered with. So we're doing the second book, which is about the progression, plus many of the cooking recipes that we have during our programs. In actual fact, it's a year at the Chateau, basically. So it's in all the seasons. And we're also considering this year having a 10-year tour, which would start at the Chateau and end in Paris, and visit a whole lot of along the way. So with a couple of days at Versailles, a concert in the Royal Opera House, which was also the same architect as the Chateau here. So we have a few things, but we'll just see what is actually sustainable for us personally. And if not, there's always next year.
Yes. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to go back. I truly like, ugh, I just can't. I literally have like no words for like how amazing it is. If anybody is curious to see like why I'm so excited, please go check out their website. I'll link it in the show notes, or their Instagram. Like it truly will leave you like your jaw on the floor if you look at the restoration process, where it started to where it is now. Truly like something that looks like it took 1,000 people to do, but Karina was at the head of this mountain of work. So when we think about your not only your 10 years, but kind of like your life BCAC, what is something you think you value now that you used to not value?
Well, if I'm allowed to be a bit indulgent,
Yes.
I probably value myself more than or allow well, I guess it's a bit personal, but when you're sort of young and it's only taken me of the last couple of years to actually even know what even my values were, or actually writing them down, because I grew up in a generation where we sort of didn't do things like that. As a young adult, you got married, you had children. And I think one of the greatest things I've actually had that I've received as a gift is actually to get to know myself better, which I didn't actually probably even know, and I'd never actually ever given thought to. And I think that is the foundation to really going ahead and knowing myself better, knowing my own values, who I am. I mean, I guess one of the things about being here on my own is that it's the first time I've ever been on my own. So I think being able to do better things and to be a better person in the future, I think that has been one of the biggest gifts, is to have that. And I do really value that there's been a part in my life, a time in my life, that I've actually been given that as a gift.
And what is something you no longer value that you used to value?
Um, I guess probably not really a great value, but I think acceptance and not being liked, but the approval of others and fitting into a stereotype or fitting into a particular culture. Um, I think that when I arrived here, and I live, in a completely different culture than what I did in Western Australia, and then I'm even reasonably isolated here to a certain point, is that I actually feel free of external expectations. And I think that what other people think or feel about me, about the project, anything, it just means very little to me anymore, where it may have meant a lot to me in the past. I remember a time in my life where I was nervous about putting my hair in a ponytail of what someone might think, which I know sounds like a ridiculous thing. Um, Now, as you can see, I'm battling to find a hairbrush. But I mean, not that I'm that feral. It's just that not having to have acceptance from anyone else is such a freedom. And we talk a lot about freedom, money buys freedom, etc., like that. And certainly it does, and things like that. But to actually have freedom of anyone else's judgment is really just it. That is really truly a gift, because we spend most of our lives being judged, whether we want to be or not.
That is so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your time. I know you're just wrapped up a wedding at the chateau and you have so many projects to work on. So I so appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today from France. If anybody is interested in getting to know the chateau experience, going on one of the experiences, or just learning about the history, I'll 100% link the Instagram and website in the show notes. Thank you so much.